Enugu was always a city of quiet ambition, red earth under your feet, bright hopes in your heart. And in the heart of the city, behind a rusted black gate and a single-room apartment painted in peeling cream, lived a young man named Peter. Peter was not a man of many words. He was modest in both speech and living. A graduate of political science from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, he had once believed a degree would open the world to him, that wearing a convocation gown meant the gates of opportunity would swing wide. But 2 years after graduation, reality hit like a hammer. CVs submitted turned into silence, interviews turned into promises that never came, and hope, well, it began to lose its voice. With his parents long gone, and only a younger brother who had traveled to Abuja in search of greener pastures, Peter knew he had no one to fall back on. His uncle once told him, "A man must make himself useful or risk being useless." That line stuck like glue. So Peter rolled up his sleeves and decided to learn a trade, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Furniture making wasn't glamorous. In fact, for a young man with a degree, it was considered shameful by some. Each time he stood outside his small workshop in a charter layout, dusting his sweaty face with a rag and hammering away at a plank, there were whispers. "Fine boy like this, see as he dey disgrace certificate. He for just marry wood now." But the harshest jabs came from young ladies. Some sneered as they passed, others laughed aloud. "Na carpenter be ya destiny, God forbid." One even threw an empty sachet of water at him once and muttered, "I can never marry a man way they smell like sawdust." Peter heard it all, and every word carved something into his heart. But he didn't stop, because for him, this wasn't the end. It was just a necessary bend. His workshop was a small wooden shed, no bigger than 2 kiosks joined together. Inside were a few tools, planks leaned against the wall, and a low wooden table where he sketched designs with pencil and ruler. Slowly, jobs started to come in. Chairs, shelves, center tables, mostly small orders, but enough to keep food on his table and rent paid. He made enough to live, not to impress. Then, on a humid Monday morning, Peter walked into a bank at Okpata Avenue to resolve an issue with his account. His ATM card had been swallowed over the weekend, and the queue to see a customer care officer was long and full of complaints. Tired and a little sweaty, he stood quietly, gripping his withdrawal slip and trying not to lose patience. Behind the glass counter, moving quickly between computers and paperwork, was a lady with calm eyes and an air of quiet authority. Her name tag read Faith A. Faith was not the kind of woman you noticed because she was loud. She wasn't wearing any flashy makeup or exaggerated lashes, but there was something about the way she moved, graceful, focused, kind, that made her stand out. Peter finally reached the front of the queue, but the person assigned to him said the matter would take 2 weeks. Frustrated, he sighed and turned to leave. That's when Faith, who had been listening quietly from her corner, signaled to him. "Sir, can I see the complaint form?" Peter turned, a little surprised. I thought only the lady I was assigned to could handle it." "I'm not supposed to do this," she said gently, "but let me try something for you. No promises." She took his form, typed furiously, made 2 calls, and 10 minutes later, she printed a temporary withdrawal slip. Then, with a small smile, she handed it over. "You'll have access again before the end of today. Just don't tell my supervisor," she added with a playful grin. Peter laughed. "Your secret is safe with me. Thank you." "Any time," she said, returning to her desk. He walked out of the bank that day with more than a resolved banking issue. He left with a name and a face he couldn't shake. Faith. There was something about her that felt different, refreshing even. That night, Peter couldn't sleep, not just because of the long day or the sawdust still clinging to his trousers, but because he kept thinking about a woman who did more than her job, who didn't look at him like just another sweaty carpenter, but like a person. And in that quiet room, under a dim yellow bulb, Peter took out his old Nokia phone, typed in her full name from the name tag, and searched for her on Facebook. There she was, smiling in a picture with books behind her. Her profile read, Graduate of Guidance and Counseling, Unizik, Lover of People, Fearer of God. Peter smiled. He clicked Add Friend. Peter never liked being too forward with women. He believed in pacing, in planting seeds before expecting fruit. But with Faith, everything felt different. After sending that friend request on Facebook, he waited with an odd mixture of hope and nervousness. She accepted it the next evening. Their first chat was simple, polite. Peter, good evening, Miss Faith. This is Peter, the carpenter you helped at the bank. Faith, good evening, Peter. Of course, I remember. Glad to hear from you. Hope your card worked. Peter, it did, thank you. You saved me a lot of stress. Faith, it was nothing, just doing what I could. And from there, a thread was tied. Conversations moved from once a day to several times. Mornings began with, Good morning, Peter, and ended with, Sleep well, Faith. They started sending voice notes. Peter's voice deep and deliberate, Faith's voice soft and slightly musical. In 2 weeks, Peter felt like he had known her for a year. He learned she was the second daughter in a family of 5. She had studied guidance and counseling because she wanted to help children and young people find direction in life. She loved reading, gospel music, and yam porridge with dried fish. He, in turn, told her about his early struggles, how he had roamed Enugu with his CV, how he cried the day he sold his first wooden shelf, how his hands had grown calloused from shaping wood, but his heart remained tender. He tried not to hide the truth. One evening, after they had talked for hours, he sent her a message that paused her in her tracks. Peter, Faith, before this goes further, I need to tell you something. Faith, okay, I'm listening. Peter, I'm not rich. I'm not even close. I make furniture. I have a small workshop. I'm still building, still learning. I don't want you to think I'm someone I'm not. There was a pause. Then her reply came. Faith, Peter, do you think I didn't notice your hands that day in the bank? They were rough and hard-working. I liked that. You spoke with humility. That's rare. I don't care how much you have. I care about who you are. Peter sat with the phone in his hands for almost 10 minutes, staring at that message. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That night, he couldn't stop thanking God. 2 days later, he asked her out on a proper date.
They met at a small restaurant near Holy Ghost Park. Peter wore his best shirt, sky blue with tiny dots, and polished his brown shoes until they shone. Faith came in a simple gown and flat shoes, her hair tied in a neat puff. No makeup, just lip gloss. They talked like they always did. She asked about his latest project, a bookshelf for a lecturer. He asked about her dreams, to one day open a counseling center for teenagers. The waiter had to come back 3 times before they finally ordered. Then, as the sun began to set outside the glass window, Peter leaned forward. Faith, I've never met someone who sees me like you do. I don't have plenty things to offer now, but I know my heart is whole and honest. Will you be my girlfriend? Faith smiled. I was wondering when you would ask. Peter laughed in relief. Their relationship blossomed like a plant watered daily. There were no dramatic fights, no social media dramas, just 2 people who respected each other and genuinely enjoyed growing together. A year later, after saving little by little and planning carefully, Peter bought a modest silver ring and knelt before her in the same restaurant. Faith, you saw the man behind the carpenter. Will you be my wife? She didn't wait a second. Yes, Peter, 1,000 times yes. They had a small church wedding, attended by friends, family, and neighbors, many of whom had watched Peter's journey from the struggling graduate to the hard-working man of vision. The reception was modest but joyful, filled with laughter, dancing, and plates of jollof rice and chicken wings. And as they sat side by side that night, Exhausted but happy, Peter held Faith's hand and whispered, "I don't know what I did to deserve you." Faith leaned on his shoulder and said, "You just loved me honestly. That's enough." That was the beginning of their forever. Not a perfect one, but a real one. Built not on wealth, but on love, honesty, and shared dreams. The early months of Peter and Faith's marriage were filled with love, laughter, and late-night talks under the dim bulb in their small bedroom. They were not rich by any means, but they had peace, and to them, that was a form of wealth money couldn't buy. But as the months turned into a year, one thing began to weigh heavily on their hearts: the silence of a child's cry in their home. At first, they told themselves not to worry. "It's just timing," Peter would say. "God's time is always the best," Faith would reply with a smile. But deep down, they both knew they longed for the patter of tiny feet running around their modest home. They had agreed before marriage that they both loved children. Peter wanted a daughter who would have Faith's calm smile and bright eyes. Faith wanted a boy who would follow Peter everywhere, wearing matching little trousers covered in sawdust. They used to dream aloud about baby names and who would do midnight feeding. Now, those dreams sat quietly between them, waiting for life. After 6 months of trying, they decided to pray more seriously about it. They declared 3 days of fasting and prayer, not the kind shouted from mountaintops, but quiet, heartfelt petitions whispered between meals skipped and hearts surrendered. At night, Peter would kneel beside the bed, hands lifted, while Faith cried softly into her pillow. Still, nothing. They visited 3 different hospitals, one in GRA, another in New Haven, and the last at a private clinic near Ugbani Road. Blood tests, scans, fertility checks, all came back normal.
"Medically, there's no reason why you can't conceive," the doctor said, looking up from the final report. "You're both in good health." Faith tried to smile, but her lips trembled. As they walked out of the hospital that day, Peter squeezed her hand tightly. "If there's nothing wrong, then there's nothing to fear. God is just taking his time." Faith nodded, blinking back tears. Peter became even more attentive. Every morning he left notes for Faith, sometimes scribbled on a small piece of paper placed beside her toothbrush, other times tucked into her handbag. "I love you more than ever. You are more than enough, even without a child." Faith, in return, would prepare his favorite yam porridge, humming softly as she stirred, trying not to show the heaviness in her heart. Then, one Sunday morning, about a year and a half into their marriage, Faith threw up just as she was about to dress for church. Peter rushed to her side, holding her gently. At first, they both thought it was food poisoning, maybe the suya they had eaten the night before. But when it happened again the next morning, Faith sat up on the bed and whispered, "Peter, what if?" They rushed to a small diagnostic lab near Ogi Road. The technician ran a test and asked them to come back in an hour. That hour felt like a whole day. Peter paced outside, his palms sweating. Faith sat on the edge of the wooden bench, whispering prayers under her breath. Finally, the technician returned, a smile stretching across his face. "Congratulations, madam! You're pregnant!" Peter froze. Faith gasped. And then, like a dam that had held back joy for too long, tears burst from both their eyes. Peter laughed, lifted Faith off the bench, and spun her around right there in front of the lab. Passers-by stared, but he didn't care. "Thank you, Jesus!" he shouted. "Thank you!" That night, he bought a small chocolate cake from a nearby shop. He didn't have much, but he stopped by the market and bought a bottle of malt, 2 apples, and a new pillow for Faith, something soft for her to rest on. "This is just the beginning," he said, as they shared the cake in their small kitchen, their eyes glistening with tears and hope. Over the following weeks, Peter became even more protective. He adjusted her workload, insisted she rest more, and even bought a small rechargeable fan for when the heat became too much. On one of his trips to the timber market, he returned with a tiny rocking chair he had built in a few hours. It wasn't perfect, but it was made with love. "I want our baby to rock in this," he said, smiling shyly. Faith couldn't stop crying, not out of sadness, but joy. The kind that comes when years of waiting finally turn into songs of thanksgiving. The house was still small, their income still modest, but their hearts had never felt fuller. Because inside Faith now grew a promise, a prayer answered, a child hoped for. And Peter, the humble carpenter from Engu, was ready to be a father. 9 months passed like a slow-moving dream, each day filled with gentle care, cautious joy, and constant prayers. Faith bloomed during her pregnancy. Her smile was softer, her steps slower, and her presence even more graceful than before. Peter did all he could to make things easier for her. He would come back from his workshop, wipe the dust off his face, and go straight to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Sometimes it was just boiled yam and egg sauce, but Faith always smiled and said it tasted like restaurant food. Finally, on a cool Friday evening in October, the moment arrived. Faith had been feeling contractions since morning, but she didn't want to alarm Peter. When the pain intensified around 6 p.m., Peter rushed her to a nearby maternity center. The labor lasted 6 hours. Peter waited in the corridor the entire time, pacing back and forth, biting his nails and whispering prayers. Then, at exactly 11:37 p.m., he heard the sharp, strong cry of a newborn baby. A nurse stepped out a few minutes later, beaming. "Congratulations, Mr. Peter! You have a beautiful baby girl!" Peter broke down and wept like a child. He dropped to his knees right there in the hospital corridor and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." When he saw his daughter for the first time, wrapped in a soft pink cloth, he was speechless. Her skin was smooth and brown, her eyes shut in peaceful sleep, and her tiny fingers curled gently around his own. Faith was weak but smiling, her eyes moist with tears of joy. "She's perfect," Peter whispered. "We should name her Gift," Faith said, her voice low and tired. Peter looked at her, surprised. "That's exactly what I was thinking." And so, the baby girl was named Gift Peter Okoye, a name that would carry a deep meaning for the rest of her life. When they returned home, Peter threw a small celebration in their living room. It was nothing extravagant, just close neighbors, friends from church, and the local pastor who came to bless the child. There was jollof rice in coolers, plates of puff-puff, and 2 crates of malt and soft drinks. Laughter filled the house as Peter shared the story of their journey. "She is a gift from God," he said, raising his plastic cup of malt, "and we will love her with everything we have." For the next 2 years, Gift was the light of their home. She grew up happy, surrounded by love. Her giggles echoed through the walls, and her favorite place was on her father's shoulders as he walked around the compound. Faith took time off work to care for her, and Peter would carve small toys for her from leftover wood. But just after her 2nd birthday, Faith began to notice something different. Gift wasn't growing like the other children. While her mates in the compound had shot up, running around and getting taller, Gift's growth seemed to have slowed drastically. At first, they thought it was just a phase. Maybe she was a late bloomer. But then came the other signs. Her arms and legs were shorter than usual, and her fingers seemed broader at the tips. Her forehead was slightly more prominent than expected, and her spine appeared curved when she stood for too long. Though she was smart and full of life, walking long distances seemed to tire her easily. She had a waddling gait and sometimes complained of back pain after sitting too long. Concerned, Peter and Faith took her to a pediatrician. After several tests and consultations, the doctor gently explained the diagnosis: achondroplasia, a common form of dwarfism. It was a genetic condition, not caused by anything they did or failed to do. Faith's eyes welled up with tears, and Peter clenched his fists silently. "Will she be okay?" Peter finally asked. "She'll live a full life," the doctor assured them. "She may be small in stature, but with the right care, love, and support, she can do anything other children do. The most important thing is how you treat her and how you help her see herself." They returned home that evening in silence. Peter sat on the edge of the bed, looking at a sleeping Gift, her small chest rising and falling with every breath. She was still his miracle, his answered prayer. Nothing had changed in his heart. If anything, he loved her even more. Faith walked in and knelt beside him. "She's still our Gift," she said softly. Peter nodded, wiping a tear. "Yes, and we will protect her with everything we have." And so, though the world would soon start to look at Gift differently, in that small home in Enugu, she remained exactly who she was, a child of love, a miracle in flesh, and above all, a divine gift. Gift turned 5 on a bright Saturday morning in November. The day began with laughter and music. Faith had woken up early to braid Gift's hair into neat cornrows, decorated with colorful beads that clinked softly as she moved. Peter returned from the market with balloons, paper hats, and 2 packs of chin-chin. He couldn't afford a big party, but he had saved just enough to make the day feel special. In their modest sitting room, decorated with pink ribbons and a handmade cardboard sign that read, "Happy Birthday Gift," the celebration was simple but joyful. A few children from the neighborhood came around. Faith made rice and stew, Peter brought out a small cake he had ordered from a nearby baker, and together they sang and danced. Gift stood at the center of it all, beaming. Her dress was lemon green with white lace, and she wore her favorite white shoes, a little worn at the heel, but clean and polished. Peter, proud and excited, took several pictures on his phone. He captured moments of Gift blowing out her candles, laughing with her friends, and hugging her parents tightly. That evening, after clearing up the plates and putting Gift to sleep, Peter and Faith sat side by side on the couch, scrolling through the photos. "These are beautiful," Faith said, smiling. "She looks so happy." "She is," Peter replied. "Let's share a few online, so our friends and family can join in the joy." Faith nodded. She selected 4 photos and posted them on her Facebook account with the caption, "Our little angel turns 5 today. A true gift from God. Please say a prayer for her." Peter did the same. His post read, "Happy birthday to my precious daughter Gift. We are forever grateful for the joy you bring us." They didn't expect what came next. At first, the comments were kind. "Happy birthday, Gift. She's so cute. May God bless her and keep her." But within an hour, something changed. A stranger commented, "What's wrong with her face?" Another wrote, "This one go grow at all?" And then came a particularly cruel one that shook them both. "She looks like a small devil." Peter froze. Faith covered her mouth in horror. Within a few hours, the posts had gone viral, not for celebration, but for ridicule. Screenshots of Gift's photo were shared with mocking captions on random Facebook groups and gossip pages. Some people laughed, others joined in the cruelty. Peter tried to delete the posts, but it was too late. The pictures had already been copied and reposted. Their daughter, their joy, had become a subject of mockery for people who knew nothing about her, or about the love that filled her home. Faith sat on the edge of the bed that night, holding her phone tightly, her shoulders trembling. "Why would people be this wicked?" she whispered. Peter's jaw was clenched. "Because the world is full of darkness, but that doesn't mean we should let it dim her light." They thought about taking legal action. Peter reached out to a friend who had studied law, asking what it would cost to pursue a defamation case, or at least report the pages spreading the photos. But the fees were far beyond what they could afford. They were barely meeting their own daily needs. Adding lawyer fees would only sink them deeper. "We'll leave it in God's hands," Faith finally said. "Let Him fight for us." Peter nodded. "But we must protect Gift. We must never let her see any of those comments." From that moment on, they became even more intentional in surrounding Gift with love. They told her how beautiful she was every day. They celebrated her wins, no matter how small. When she recited a poem at her school's end-of-term event, Peter clapped the loudest. When she struggled with tying her shoelaces, Faith would kneel beside her and say, "Take your time, my star. You're doing great." They didn't pretend the pain wasn't there. Some nights, Faith would cry silently into Peter's chest. Some mornings, Peter would take longer to leave for work, staring blankly into space as he tried to understand why the world was so cruel to someone so innocent. But one thing never changed: their love for Gift. She was still their miracle, their answered prayer, their reason to keep going. And no matter what the internet said, in their eyes, she remained just what her name declared: a gift. The storm of mockery continued for months. Though they stopped posting photos of Gift online, cruel strangers still shared her old pictures with vile captions. The comments hurt, sometimes like knives to the chest. But Peter and Faith kept their promise to each other. They would not let the bitterness of the world poison their home. Instead, they poured even more love into Gift. She was growing fast, smart, playful, and curious. She had an impressive memory and could recite Bible verses like she had been born with them on her tongue. Her school teacher once told Faith, "Gift is one of the brightest children in class. Her stature may be small, but her mind is huge." Faith smiled, but she didn't say what was in her heart. If only the world could see her the way we do. Yet, while the noise of hatred tried to pull them down, something strange began to happen. Like a door opening quietly in the background while everyone was looking the other way. It started with a phone call. Peter had just returned from delivering a custom wardrobe to a customer in new layout when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he picked up anyway. "Hello? Is this Mr. Peter Okoye, the furniture maker?" "Yes, speaking," Peter replied cautiously. "My name is Mr. Asanye. I'm calling on behalf of a construction firm based in Independence Layout. We're working on a new office building and would like you to handle the entire furnishing: desks, cabinets, reception area. Can you come for a meeting tomorrow?" Peter almost dropped the phone. That meeting led to a contract worth more than anything he had ever handled. They paid him up front for materials and offered to connect him with a supplier in Asaba who would provide wood at a cheaper rate. That job led to another, then another. Within 3 months, Peter's workshop transformed. He hired 4 new apprentices, then 5, then 8. The small wooden shed expanded into 2 large units, one for crafting, one for assembling and polishing. His tools improved. His designs became more polished, professional, and even artistic. Soon, people began referring to him not just as the carpenter, but Peter Woodworks. His name was printed on stickers, labels, and business cards. His furniture was featured in 3 major hotels, a bank, and a government office. His income more than tripled. And then Faith's own miracle came, quietly, just like Peter's. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when she received an email from the Enugu State Ministry of Children Affairs. She had applied for a public therapist role nearly 8 months ago and forgotten all about it. "Congratulations," the letter began. "You have been appointed as a child development therapist with the ministry. Report on Monday to receive your orientation and work tools. Salary details are attached." At first, she thought it was a scam, but when she called the number provided and was told to come in person for her appointment letter, reality sank in. She was now a government worker, a permanent staff, with a solid monthly salary, benefits, and something she never expected: a brand new government-issued vehicle, a blue Toyota Corolla with "Child Affairs" printed subtly on the back windshield. When Peter saw the car parked in front of their home that evening, he shook his head and laughed like a child. "Look at what God is doing," he said, lifting Gift in his arms and spinning her around. Their neighbors noticed too. People who had once pitied Peter for choosing carpentry over white-collar work now greeted him with extra respect. Some even came to ask for advice. The same house that once echoed only with struggle now vibrated with hope and praise. But Peter and Faith remained grounded. They didn't flaunt their new wealth. They didn't build a mansion overnight or throw extravagant parties. Instead, they focused on investing in their work, in their daughter, in their community. Peter upgraded his machines and enrolled in a design course online. Faith began offering free weekend counseling sessions for children from low-income families. They also hired a private pediatrician to monitor Gift's growth. The doctor recommended a special supplement imported from Canada, which would support her bone development and overall health. It wouldn't make her tall, nothing could change her genetic makeup, but it would make her stronger, healthier, and more comfortable in her own body. Gift began to glow in new ways. Her cheeks were rounder, her steps firmer. Her confidence grew too. She started helping her mother in the kitchen, asking Peter to teach her how to sand wood just a little. She loved dancing to gospel music in the living room and drawing with colored pencils on the weekends. One evening after dinner, as the family sat outside watching the sky slowly darken, Faith turned to Peter and said, "Do you think this is God's way of telling us He hasn't forgotten?" Peter looked at her, eyes warm. "I think, while the world was mocking, God was preparing." They were no longer just the couple that everyone felt sorry for. They were now a symbol of strength, proof that pain can coexist with purpose, that favor can still find those the world rejects. Even as the online noise continued, Peter and Faith stopped paying attention. Their focus was now on the real world, the one filled with grace, hard work, and answered prayers. And every night, as they knelt beside their daughter's bed to pray, they whispered the same words, "Thank you, Lord, for this gift." The wind of change blew through Peter and Faith's life like the harmattan, fierce, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Within just 2 years of the breakthrough in their careers, the family had gone from modest living to remarkable success. And they didn't have to force it. It came naturally, like a reward written in the hands of time. It began with a move. Peter had always dreamed of living in Independence Layout, one of the most desirable places in Enugu, known for its quiet streets, big homes, and a sense of peace that made you forget the chaos of the city.
For years, it had felt like a distant dream, something only rich men with connections could afford. But now, he was one of those men, though he didn't carry himself like it. They moved into a 2-story house painted ivory white with large windows and a wooden front door Peter had designed and crafted himself. The compound had green grass, a tiny garden where Faith planted hibiscus and tomatoes, and a paved driveway where Gift loved to ride her pink bicycle. Neighbors welcomed them warmly, some with curiosity, others with admiration. After all, not many people in Enugu knew that a man who once worked from a tiny wooden shed could now afford to import Italian wardrobes and Chinese dining sets by the container load. Peter's furniture business had grown beyond belief. His workshop had become a registered company, Peter Woodworks and Interiors Limited, complete with a showroom, a manager, 2 full-time designers, and a team of 20 skilled workers. Orders came in from within and outside Enugu. Banks, hotels, and even private mansions sought his signature touch. He had traveled to China once to inspect a shipment, and to Italy twice to attend international furniture expos. At the last one, he spoke on a panel about authenticity and African-inspired designs. His audience gave him a standing ovation. Yet, despite the growth, Peter never stopped coming home with sawdust on his hands. He still supervised projects personally, still rolled up his sleeves when necessary, still prayed before making big deliveries. Faith, too, had risen higher than she ever imagined. Her role at the Ministry of Children Affairs allowed her to touch lives on a scale she never thought possible. She developed therapy programs for children with trauma, learning disabilities, and special needs. She worked closely with schools and hospitals. She wrote policies. She advocated for better training of child welfare workers. One day, she received a letter inviting her to the governor's residence for a special recognition event. She thought it was just a conference. But at the event, the governor's wife called her name among the honorees. For her tireless work in supporting children with special needs across Enugu State, and for leading a compassionate revolution in the ministry, the First Lady said, "We present this award of excellence and a token of $50 million to support her ongoing initiatives." Faith was speechless. She stood on stage with shaking hands as camera flashes lit her face. Peter, sitting in the front row, smiled proudly, holding Gift on his lap. And speaking of Gift, she too was thriving. The doctor they now saw regularly, a specialist in pediatric development, recommended a new supplement. Imported, expensive, and hard to find, but effective. Peter didn't hesitate. He bought a 6-month supply immediately. The supplement didn't make Gift tall overnight. No pill could rewrite DNA, but it helped her body adjust better. Her posture improved, her appetite increased, and her energy levels shot up. She was no longer getting easily tired or uncomfortable in her own skin. Her confidence was growing right along with her tiny frame. Her schoolmates now admired her intelligence. Her teachers spoke highly of her creativity. And at the last school interhouse sports, even though she couldn't run like the others, she led the school's quiz team and won first place. Her smile that day could have lit the whole of Enugu. Still, Peter and Faith never forgot the pain they once felt, or the people who caused it. 3 of the harshest mockers, strangers who had written vile things online, some of whom even tagged Peter's business page back then with laughing emojis, had gone through very bitter seasons themselves.
One of them, a young lady who had shared Gift's photo on a Facebook gossip group and added the caption, "Abeg u barn midget Lucifer," was involved in a terrible accident during a road trip to Lagos. The crash shattered her legs, and both were amputated. She now moved around in a wheelchair. Her once vibrant Instagram page was silent now. Another, a woman who had mocked Faith in a comment saying, "This one no fit born normal pekin, na dwarf she dey celebrate," had since been diagnosed with unexplained infertility. Despite multiple IVF attempts and spiritual consultations, she had not conceived. In one post she wrote, "I just want to be called Mummy someday. God, remember me." The last, a self-proclaimed influencer who had reposted Gift's photo with laughing emojis and tagged others to join, had recently posted a teary video on social media. Her husband had left her for her closest friend. She sobbed in the clip, saying, "I trusted her with everything. I don't even know who to blame anymore." Peter and Faith never responded, never gloated, never said a word. But in their hearts, they knew, God does not sleep. He sees. Every night before bedtime, they gathered in the living room for family devotions. Gift would sing her favorite chorus, "He's a miracle-working God," and then kneel between her parents for prayers. Peter would hold her small hand in one hand and Faith's hand in the other, and say, "Lord, thank you for proving that you are still the lifter of men. Thank you for showing the world that our daughter is not a mistake. She is a message." Because indeed she was, and the world that once mocked her was now silent, or watching, or learning. But one thing was certain, they could no longer ignore the gift they once rejected.